they need the beamer soon somewhere else, so otherwise we don't have a screen. So tomorrow we will all be here as well, so you can try out all this cool stuff by yourself. So that will be definitely something you can do. Today, maybe we have time for it later as well, but be sure to check it out tomorrow. I'm going to talk about the catalyst controller today, and I have 30 minutes-ish, so let's see how quickly I can go. I thought I had an hour when I made this presentation, so yeah, so there you go. So what we're going to do, we'll look at, and I'm going to go through this quite speedily, so if somebody wants to have these slides later on, then hit me up, I'll hook you up with that, no problem. But we're going to start a little bit about me, hopefully really short, and then about how we got here, or how I got here with my controller. Then we're going to talk about the actual catalyst, which is here, so you can come and look at it later as well. A catalyst tracker, and then we have some time for Q&A, which probably will be non-existent, but come find me after or tomorrow. I'm happy to answer any of your questions and you know, geek out over this kind of stuff. So, about me. My name is Bob Kruijer. I'm Dutch. I was born in Amsterdam. I'm turning 42 this year. God damn, I'm old. I've been in turntablism for about 20-odd-ish years, and lately, so the last 5-6 years, I think I've become more of a maker as well, or an engineer, or whatever you want to call it. And that's what I'm a little bit going to talk about today as well. I'm married. I have 2 kids, 12 and 14, so they're kind of in the terrible teenage years. And I'm here this whole weekend, so I'm really excited to be here with all these people who are sharing at least part of the same thoughts that I have as well. So, turntablist stuff, well, I've been into turntablism for about 20 years. Started out scratching a little bit on really crappy mixers, which was exciting and good to do, but I was in a band at the time. I was still in university, and I realized I really don't have the talent or the skills to compete on higher levels. So it really has been a hobby for me ever since. But well, like I said, I'm kind of interested in making things. And before you make things, you break stuff. So that's the third point here. So what I did at some point in 2014, 13, this is one of my 05 mixers, and I actually built this kind of fretless fader contraption in it. So this is a picture of when I was doing that. This is not the finalized product. But I started cutting up stuff and building stuff and things like that. But then, of course, what I've done, I've also made stuff, so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And I'm going through this pretty quickly because we don't have so much time. What I wanted to do, I wanted to basically make a kind of a unit that you could use and that I could do stuff with. So when I made the first Midi note fader, which is basically a fretless fader clone or similar idea. The biggest problem I had, and I'm not a coder, I'm not an engineer by crafts either, but I knew what I wanted to do. So what you can do, what I learned by YouTube and tutorials and stuff, you need to have an analog to digital conversion, what Nick was also talking about a little bit. So what you see here is a made in China kind of controller for a PC, USB controller. It's about €2, and I actually hacked one of the thumbsticks and put in a normal fader in there. So what you're able to do with this, you can actually send the USB signal of that fader into your computer. And this is important because once I was able to do that, I actually made this Midi note fader control panel, which basically, what Nick, if you saw Nick's presentation before, it takes in this data coming in through USB, which is basically your fader position, going up and down, and you can do all kinds of stuff with it. What I did, I mapped it to a scale, so you get some notes in there. You get the idea. I'm not going to dwell onto it too much, but that's what I did at that point. So I used some software, which I kind of made myself, not in the best way, and then I was able to make a MIDI signal. Really kind of simply I made that. And once I did that, and I put out some stuff into the world of social media, Some other guys were also interested, so I've kind of shared all my stuff, like this control panel, people could use it. If they were making their own mixers, and some people actually have. They've built their own modified Vestax 06 mixers, put a vertical rail in there, some kind of ADC or analog to digital converter, like a TN0 or a Juno or something like that, and then made their own kind of you know, fretless faders or whatever you want to call that. And these are some examples. So you might know what these guys are. That's Rich Ruffton on the right. He actually has one that somebody else built for him. He's using this control panel to do exactly that. So make some kind of Midi notes. And Brace as well. He built it himself. So I think that's really great. He built the mixer himself. But he was using my control panel in this specific set actually. I made a special version for him that he could use with his Rain in this. I think he won the title in the online DMC championship. But it was really kind of a history thing. And I started making more stuff then. And basically the history is that I had an idea, I built something, you revise that, come up with better ideas, and basically repeat that. So this is the first working prototype of the Midi note fader. So this is styrofoam. These rails are some kind of rails that you buy when you build a kitchen and you make a drawer. Those are those things. You can see here the USB controller sort of hacked in with that fader there. And here's an actual crossfader that's linked to the 05 mixer still. I was able to cut the sound and also set some kind of MIDI signal to my turntable, which actually has a modification, the MIDI mod that Backtrack made. So I was able to play or change the pitch on the turntable with this vertical motion. This was super ugly, but it worked. The idea being, it worked. And I think we discussed it earlier today that, you know, as a maker or an engineer, you're happy when something works, but then obviously it needs to be sort of sturdy and stable as well. So that's where we're getting at. So this is a standalone pro build. I did same idea, vertical motion, but with a display in it. It doesn't need any extra software. You can just hook up that mixer to your turntable or to your synthesizer, and it will send out MIDI notes. Same kind of way. So that's kind of. I think there's about 2.5 or 3 years between this. So this didn't happen overnight, but it took quite a while. Okay, so how do we get the catalyst controller, which is sitting on this mixer here? If you think about making music or playing tones on turntables, the guys of you who've been around long enough, you know, at some point you had guys doing sets and battles where they were using the Technics turntable pitch, and with the 8% pitch control, you can play only a few tones. So that will sound in tune with what you're trying to do if you have only one tone on your record. So that was kind of what some people tried and they started with there. Then you got this Vestax and Ultrapitch turntables, which was great because they had 50%, so you could theoretically do more notes or do more kind of scales. And I think the controller one being a good example of actually being able to play that as well. But that was kind of the next step, I think. And then, you know, with DVS kind of becoming more and more popular towards, I guess, 2005 and then onwards from there, you could have cue point trigger pads and kind of play melodies. So you have like one sound on your track, and then you start using it as a keyboard in a way, playing some melodies and making transitions and stuff like that. Then you have Dvs Key Control as well, where you have one sample and you just pitch it up, pitch it down, where you get some kind of digital artifacts, but it's doable, it's pretty interesting. Then you get this fretless fader kind of concept. There's I think a couple of people have done it with portable turntables as well, and there's some guys who've tried to make their own builds. I've helped them with some of them. I've built a lot of them myself as well. But you need a Midi turntable for the most part. And like most of you know, Midi turntables are not exactly okay. If I would have said this a year ago, it would have been more accurate because now you have to re-loop, which is actually pretty good. But still, I would say there's more non-Midi turntables than Midi turntables. Plus, it has some big, you know, kind of side effects which are not good, I think. But we'll get into that maybe later or some other time. And then this is a nice bridge to the Syntablism stuff that Dvs Key and the circuit are going to show. Where, you know, why would you use a sample at all, or use your sort of the sound on your record, if you will, to play notes, to use turntable pitch, if you can control a synthesizer with your vinyl and with your crossfader, which is also a nice bridge to Syntablism again. So that's something that I think is really interesting, and I was very intrigued about this. At the same time, I also see a lot of drawbacks there for a large audience. So you need to be into modular. They're pretty expensive for the most part. If you look at the stuff there, it's really great gear. I'm sure there's a few thousand euros there sitting on the table. And there's no fretless aspect, so there's no way of controlling it with your crossfader and then changing notes, kind of in a way I like to do it. So maybe there's some kind of way to hack it, or you press a keyboard note or something. But that's definitely also an improvement. And then we have virtual studio tools, which are, for lack of a better explanation, these are software synthesizers. And you get them for free, you can buy them, but there's like so many of them out there, and nowadays computers are so strong. There's no use really to buy a big keyboard or a synthesizer necessarily if you just want to dabble into it. But you can't really control them with vinyl movement or with your crossfader. So this is why I made the Catalyst controller. Or I tried to solve that. And I did. That's what it looks like at the moment. You can move it up and down, it will transmit different notes. But also when you move the record, I made it so that the actual movement will also control the pitch. And there's no real big secret around that if you think about synthesizers and virtual studio tools in general. If you're a musician and you know how keyboards work, they have a big pitch bend wheel on there. And that pitch bend wheel usually is used to kind of give the sound a little bit of flavor. But if you take it to the extreme and you pitch bend really high and really low, then you get sort of the scratching effect. Because that's exactly when you're scratching a sound, what you're doing. You're increasing the pitch or you're decreasing the pitch. So what I'm using, I'm using the up and down motion to send out notes, opening the crossfader to trigger notes, and then, actually I'll show this slide here and explain a little better. There we go. So it moves up and down, change notes. There's an extra button there also that you can do some FX with. And when you open the crossfader, depending on if you're hamstering or you're regular using the crossfader, you will trigger the notes. So you will say note on, note off, similar to pressing a keyboard tone on a normal keyboard, for those of you who play piano. But then also, why stop there? If you have a tone on a record, and even if you have a Vestax turntable, there's only so many tones you can reach with kind of revolutions and the speed it's going. But a synthesizer, and when it's software, you can play whatever. It's all software. So obviously the upwards motion of the crossfader will be limited, but with these buttons you can change the octave that you're in. So you can just swap to the next octave, and you can basically play a whole scale or the whole range from the C1, what is it, until the C8 or whatever the keywords have. So you can play all of that. So you can really kind of traverse the range of notes that will be in a musical scale. And then you can also reverse it by pressing two buttons at the same time. So I like to play it so that when I'm pushing up, the notes become higher, and it's mostly because I play a little bit piano, and when your hand goes to the right or it goes further away from you, then you get higher pitched notes. Equally, there's an argument, I want to have it differently, so when I'm pulling it closer, it should be higher, because when you play a guitar, the closer you are to your body, the higher pitched notes you get. Whatever you want, you can reverse that, and then it will do that. So, this is, I think, a nice bridge to Syntablism that Nick was talking about earlier. So, the crossfader, and I'm mostly talking about Tractor here, because I don't really like Serato. It's too close, in my opinion. So I can trigger notes, and I'm doing that by looking at the crossfader input from Tractor, actually. So that's coming out into Catalyst. But then you also have more data. So you have, obviously, for scratchers, it's usually, you want to have a cut-in and you want the sound on and off. It's like 0 and 1. But you actually have 0 to 128 or 127, something like that. So what I did, I said, let's have the first half of the crossfader range mapping to the modulation wheel, which is a normal kind of Midi signal in Midi language, which you can use. And the other half, let's also map it to something else, which is called the breed controller. But it's just You don't need to know what it means exactly, it's just good to know that you can add some kind of effect there by using that crossfader space, which otherwise would be dead. Because as a scratcher you wouldn't necessarily use that. So you're basically mapping that data to two different things, actually three. So it's a node trigger, there's a modulation wheel, and there's a breathe controller as well. And you can then map that to whatever you want. I'll show that in a bit how that works. And then we have some other stuff here, which is what the menu. So you need to obviously, it's all standalone, so you don't need any extra software. Everything's in here, so you press a button, you can change parameters, transpose the nodes, do the node rings, all this kind of stuff. I'm not going to get into that. But it has quite a lot of features which you need to have because it's a product, or it's something that you want to be using. So instead of hard coding that, you can set a lot of parameters on the device itself. So, what does it sound like? Let's see if this works. I'm actually closing this and opening this one. So this is a VST from Native Instruments, one of our sponsors here. I really like this one specifically because it has a really wide pitch bend range. So you can see when I'm opening the fader, it's actually triggering a note. So if I move this up or down, if I go an octave up, you get the idea there. So you have that, and then triggering notes, and then if I want to see the effect, what do I have mapped here? It sounds something like this. So you see, the last bit I map to a kind of vibrato, something like that. You can also map it to some kind of other effect, but that's usually pretty nice, I find, to have a vibrato function there. And then the extra Midi map button here is also mapped to an effect. But it's still really nice, but you know, you're still not scratching. So you combine that with the actual vinyl movement and add a pitch bend there. You get the idea? Yeah. How it works. So this is there's no samples being used, and that's the great thing about this. So you have all this control, but you don't need to use any samples. So you're using the actual synthesizer preset. So what I can do, I can also take another preset, and I made this already beforehand. So this is the guitar. So, with all of that, you can, if you have some arrangement in your VST or in your synthesizer, you can, you know, play all kinds of instruments with the same setup, without any extra samples, without anything, and change it on the fly as well, modify it, and map your data to the right kind of parameters. And that's another really interesting thing about Midi, that you can Midi learn a lot of devices to do certain stuff. So most VSTs have an option where you can say, I want this effect or this kind of vibrato option or whatever else to learn this control. So then the only thing you need to do is say, learn this. It goes into learn mode. Then you move your fader or you move your record, and then it knows instantly this MIDI signal which I'm receiving should be mapped to this specific control. So that's something that I found that most VSTs have. It's super simple and it's also super powerful to use. Unlike, which I think Nick said earlier about the Tractor Controller Manager, you can do a lot of stuff with it, but it's like an ass to work with, so it's not really user-friendly. Most of these MIDI VSTs are really great to work with, I must say. Alright, so we're running out of time a little bit here. So I think I'm going to speed up a little bit. No worries. So, other thing I want to talk about is Catalyst Tracker. So it's basically an extension of Catalyst Controller, and the reason, there was a picture there, It's similar to what people have seen with phase. So it's wireless kind of signal control. There's two trackers you can use, and then you need a receiver to make it work. So you don't need the actual controller here, but I'm using it because it's still giving me something. And the reason I'm using it because traditionally I use frequency analysis to look at the speed of the record. But frequency analysis is not perfect, and it's also a little bit slower, so you get latency. So I won't say any more about it than that. What this does, it measures the angular velocity. Similar to what you have in your phone. There's a gyroscope in there. It's, that kind of technology is used in all kinds of stuff right now, and it's also in there. When you turn it around, it measures the angular velocity, it knows how fast it's going, and it's generating a pitch bend signal. So I know that, but also because it's a separate device, and I know how fast it's spinning, I can also determine at what angle is it actually spinning. So is it sort of in the middle, pointing to 12 o'clock, is it at 3 o'clock? So all of that data I have, which is great. It's wireless 2.4 GHz radio band, and it connects to a receiver, which in this case is actually this specific unit. So there's a receiver in here which translates that signal into a Midi thing. It has three modes. It has pitch bend, which we're here, which does that. But it also has DVS, and that's basically similar to what phase does. So it generates a sine tone, whichever you want to do. Serato, tractor, it all works. And I also added this clock tape mode, and the clock tape record, for the guys who don't know, is something that Kipski and Sham actually came up with. I'll show something about that in a bit. And it's a really great mode which you can use without using a catalyst controller and still play notes with your synthesizer. So there you go. Yep. So I'll briefly say something about this. When I built the catalyst controller initially, I was really thinking about how can I tap into the time code. So Native Instruments and also not Serato, they don't give you the secret to how the time code works. And there's also no output coming out of Tractor or Serato that's necessarily saying, this is how you need to read that time code. I've done a lot of research and I know much more than what I'm saying here. But there is a thing called track position in Tractor, which tells you from a track for, let's say, 3 minutes, is it at the beginning or at the end? So if it will be at the beginning, it's at 0. If it's at the end, I think it's 127. But in 3 minutes, it doesn't. That number doesn't change a lot. But, and this is something I came up with Luigi at the time, if you have a track which actually is not 3 minutes, but let's say 0.1 seconds, then you have a really small track, and if you put it on a loop, you get like a counter which goes from 0 to 127 really fast, a lot of times a second. So you have some kind of position info. So I tried that. It wasn't as good, but it did work. So the next thing I tried was frequency analysis, which also has some drawbacks, but it worked better. It was faster, it was more accurate. But then I was thinking, is there not another way? And then when phase came out, I was like, of course, that's the answer, because this stuff is out there, and I already had seen these gyroscopes, but I never put that link that actually, why am I not using one of those? So I got myself a gyroscope or 6-axis distance measurement device, small PCB, it costs €3 on Alibaba or AliExpress or whatever. And it does exactly that. It tells you much more stuff, but also the angular velocity. So, in the tracker mode, it gives you a pitch bend signal over USB. If I use it together with the catalyst controller, I get also, this is basically what this is. Pitch bend and MIDI notes. Put a VST on there, and you can start scratching the sounds. You just need to configure your preset, have a maximum pitch bend, you're set to go. But then with DVS mode, because this comes back to the Syntablism talk about earlier, I have all this data, I know how fast it's moving. DVS, when you break it down, is nothing less than a sine tone, a little bit phase offset, so you can tell apart forward direction and backwards direction. So if I have all this data, I can also generate a sine tone, which is exactly what I did. And it works both with Tractor and Serato. And this is something that nobody at phase actually talks about. The actual latency. So they will say it's like the faster, we have our own wireless protocol. It's all bullshit, because this is a radio band, really popular kind of in hobbyist kind of circles. The latency of this device sending some kind of angular velocity to this and creating a pitch bend signal, but there's also some latency because of the Midi being generated, like Nick mentioned earlier, is basically the measuring of the angular velocity that takes some time. I mean, really small, but some time. Then you need to send the signal, because this is obviously your transmitter as well. You need to receive the signal on the other end, because it's wireless, because there's no wires going through it. You need to process the signal, and then you need to send out that sine tone. So there's definitely some stuff going on there. I can tell you that it's under 2 milliseconds, so most people won't even notice. But that's what it is. So there's definitely more latency than with traditional timecode. It's more stable. There's no rumble, there's no wow and flutter, or actually there's wow and flutter, I guess. But there's no rumble, there's no deterioration. I actually ran an actual tractor timecode together with my device after I calibrated it. And this is more accurate than actual timecode, because it will deteriorate. So if you actually put on a timecode record, you will see that the pitch fluctuates from 0, and then it goes up to 0.3, and then maybe to minus 0.7, and so on and so forth, because the signal deteriorates over time, because your record wears out. You never listen to that stupid tone, but it wears out anyway. That's what's happening, but this is more stable, but it's definitely latency. And then this is I think a cool thing to talk about, and also a cool thing to try. So I asked Kipski, can I make this block tape mode? So I think then we can eliminate this catalyst controller. So you don't need to have something extra. You just have your normal mixer. You make some kind of tracker like this, put a receiver there, and then if you do this, then you can play also synthesizers. So the way this works is that when the actual device is, let's say, pointing to 12 o'clock, it's playing a C note, and if it's a major scale, and then if it's at roughly 51 degrees, then it's a D, and so on and so forth. So if you go around the circle, you play different notes. And that way you can play melodies by just knowing where's my tone on the record, which is usually what you could also do if you're doing some kind of set and you have specific samples on your record. But this is how you can then do that. But you can also do other cool stuff, like maybe you could say that the left side of the circle would be some kind of synth lead, and the right side would be some kind of bass sound. So you could do all that kind of stuff as well, because you have the data, and you could come up with all this kind of stuff. So, I'll show you what that sounds like we already did the Syntablism stuff. So, I'll just, as a proof of concept, I just want to show you it also works with Tractor. I'm just changing the mode here into something else. You can see it's pretty accurate, like you would expect also. So the latency, there's more latency, but it's very minimal. Oh yeah! Yeah! One thing you do notice is that actually the signal is not getting the positional information. And that's true because it's only a sine tone. There's no tracking information. There's ways of getting around that, which I won't talk about now. So you will always get a little bit of drift. And that's not because this device is broken, and I think phase has the same thing. The devices are perfectly fine. It's because the software can't interpret the signal accurately enough to be totally kind of accurate on point of where the position is. So both Serato and Tractor actually always use the noise map or the positional info that they have baked into their timecode signal, some kind of bit structure, to kind of double check every so many times in a second that are we still at the right place in the track. So you're missing that with this. But I've tested this and I've also had a timecode again running together with this unit. And then actually played one track on the right side and one on the left, which were similar. And one actually was influenced by the timecode record, and the other one was coming from the tracker. And when you play them at 2 or 3 RPM, no problem. It just keeps on going. It's exactly accurate. And I would even say the stability and kind of the wow and flutter of the tracker is better. But once you start scratching, and basically how Tractor works, it analyzes that sine signal, it analyzes the frequency also really many times per second. At some point it gets a little bit lost. and then the actual timecode vinyl wins because it has the positional information. But that's just a side effect. So yeah, I think this is pretty much my thing for today. So if there's any questions, then feel free to ask. I'm also happy to come tomorrow or maybe later today to test all this out. Put your hands on it, and yeah, thank you very much. So I think we have time for questions from the audience. I mean, they need the beamer, but they don't need the mic. So if somebody wants to ask a question, then now is the time. No? Yeah, Nick has a million questions, but good.
Can you demonstrate the clock tape?
Yeah.
Thing in a musical way?
I can try. I mean, it should work, but I'm not sure if you have. I didn't do it before because we didn't have time. But as there's nobody here telling me to stop, I can try it. Sure. So I'm now changing the setting to clock tape. Okay, so basically, I don't have any sound on now, but you can see there the notes being triggered. So that's basically the positional info of at what degree it is, and it's telling it to go to the specific. I'm just gonna reset it so I know where the actual C note is. So 1 second. There we go. And I'll actually put a sound on which is a little bit more like a trigger instrument, like an organ. You get that? So, I mean, I don't know, Kipski made this record like years ago, and I've seen videos and it's super ill. I can never do that on this, but now you can do it with VSTs or with some otherwise synthesizers, so I think it opens up a lot of possibilities and stuff as well. Again, thank you very much, and see you around.